Average Net Worth 2021.
It's Brian Preston, the money guy.
Brian, I'm so excited. I try not to have favorites. But I think this is one of my favorite shows that we do every single year.
So this show goes hot in just the next few days. We are right before year end. And what's interesting to me, just today, I've had 3 of our coworkers come up and go, Brian, it's almost time to do net worth statement.
Almost time.
They weren't talking about this show.
Time.
They're talking about just time to do the net worth statement. That shows me we got a movement going where others are getting just as excited about tracking their net worth. But here's what's cool. On this show, we don't even talk about not only tracking your net worth, we try to show you where you should be. We actually give you some measurable goals so you can jump into this. So here's what I want to kind of reflect on, though.
Okay.
We did our first net worth show in 2017, and we've kind of made this into an annual tradition.
An annual tradition, yep.
Well, here's how I opened the 2020 show. I said, quote, what is unique about 2020?
That you mean so in 2019, that's what we said going into 2020. What's unique about 2020?
And the observations we made were so innocent and so oblivious because we were talking about, hey, it was going to be an election year.
Oh, that it was.
It was going to be a leap year.
It seems like that one didn't get a whole lot of press last year.
The glasses we're going to wear at New Year's are going to actually look cool.
Yeah.
These are the things we talked about. How little did we know that 2020 was going to really 2020 us. I mean, it was just incredible what all we faced. But I do think that New Year's create new opportunities.
For sure.
And this is definitely a time to have self-reflection, figure out what you can be doing better. And look, I think after a year like 2020 that was so hardworking, had so many things that were thrown at it, that there's a lot of opportunity to really grab that ring and move forward in 2021.
And what I love about these shows, Brian, is we're going to talk about as you're preparing your annual net worth statement. And I didn't say if, I said as, because you should be doing it every single year.
No doubt.
As you're doing it, we're going to talk about, depending on where you are age-wise, what part of the net worth statement you should be focusing on. We're going to talk a little bit about your army of dollar bills, and then we're going to close with something new, talking about a little spot check that we know you guys are going to love, we know you're going to be excited about.
Well, that's the thing. Every year when we do this, I think, oh my gosh, we just topped it. That was the best show. We've nailed it. And then we always come up with something new. This year did not disappoint.
Yep.
Here's something. Let me go ahead and set up. How do you know if you're a financial mutant? We're going to show you this year. We're going to show you what the top 25% of your peers are doing so you can measure yourself to fellow financial mutants.
I love it. All right, Brian. So let's jump right in. Let's start at the beginning with the 20s. And this is the age where we say this is where you really need to start your addiction to saving. Start that healthy savings addiction.
This is the biggest opportunity of your life. I mean, Bo, we get emails from parents. We get emails from the actual people themselves who say, you guys are changing our life because you've made me realize I have the opportunity to be on the ground floor of something incredible. I can become an empire builder if I just don't blow my shot.
That's exactly
right.
And
that's the biggest thing is that I just want people to understand just a little bit of today. This whole concept of deferred gratification can turn into a tremendous, great, big, beautiful tomorrow, but you have to start that pebble into the rolling process so it can really grow into the big financial empire that I know you have the potential to build.
So maybe you're someone in your 20s and you've only been doing your net worth statement for a short amount of time, or maybe this year is the very first year you've ever done it. You're thinking, okay, where should I focus my attention? What's the thing that I should be thinking about? We think if you want to set yourself up on solid foundational footing, you got to focus on the liabilities, the debt side of your net worth statement. You have to make sure you have that one under control.
Well, this is the first time you get to be an adult. I mean, you get in your 20s, you get to go into adulthood, and you know what? There's so many choices, so many opportunities. A lot of you go hog wild.
That's
you
right.
just don't have the discipline. And I think so much of success is built upon the back of discipline. Do not let your fall into this trap because, let's talk about where the debt traps are.
Sure.
First thing, let's talk about education, student loan debt.
It's a huge one. Maybe you're someone in your 20s who just got done with college and you have student loans, or maybe you're someone in your early or mid-20s thinking, you know what? I should go back to school. The economy is unique or there's things going on. Maybe I should go take out some loans and go get that advanced degree, go get that graduate degree. while that may possibly be an okay solution, there's some things you ought to think about before you decide to go saddle yourself with that debt.
Yeah, pick your major well. We always recommend, here's a good baseline thing to know. You don't want to come out of college with more student loan than what your first year anticipated salary is.
That's great. So if you're someone who's going to come out making $40,000, $50,000 a year, it probably does not make sense to go rack up hundreds of thousands of dollars of student loan debt.
Let's talk about credit cards. Credit cards, no-go land. I'm okay with credit card use. Credit card debt should not exist. If you're not paying it off every month, you've got a problem. Try to get it off your net worth statement as fast as possible.
Now, this is probably the only place where we say this, but if you are one of those folks who's like, you know, Brian, I hear you say pay it off every month, and I just keep finding myself in credit card debt, and I pay it off, and I get back into it. What should I do? In our opinion, cut them up.
Yeah.
If you're not someone who's proven that you can use them responsibly, don't use them at all. Don't even try. Stay away from credit cards if you can't
And
do it
look, the
responsibly.
opportunity cost is just too big. I mean, the interest rate on credit cards is somewhere between 18 to 21, 22%. The most you can expect out of your rate of return, a good performance return on your investments, is somewhere between 8 to 12%. So it doesn't make sense to pay the credit card companies compounding interest of somewhere between 18 to 22% when you're only hoping to make 18 to 12% on your investments. Don't get stuck in the credit card game. Let's talk about auto loans. This is a big one. You feel like, hey, I've gone through college. I've got this major. I'm now working. I got, my big boy, big girl things going on in my life. This is the time to reward myself with a brand new car.
Yeah, and I don't mind confessing I fell prey to this. I got my very first job, my very first salary. First thing I did is I went out and bought a big, fancy, nice car. And that was sort of silly. That was sort of dumb. And I did not follow the money guy principle because we think when it comes to buying an automobile, the thing you want to make sure you do is you subscribe to 23-8. You want to put 20% down. You don't want to finance any more than 3 years or 36 months, even though they might offer you 84-month financing now. And you can't let your total car payment exceed 8% of your monthly gross income. 20% down, 3-year financing, 8%. If you can't buy a car that fits in those parameters, you're probably looking at too expensive of a car.
And I've got 2 additional rules to put on top of that.
Okay.
These are kind of overreaching, sit on top umbrella rules, and the fact that if your savings, your monthly savings are not exceeding your monthly car payment, you're doing it completely wrong. Number 2, the 23-8 only applies to normal car brands. If you get into luxury, if you get into anything that I would consider premium, and it breaks my heart to even put Tesla in this, but Tesla, Lexus, Mercedes, BMW, those things, 12 months, same as cash. I don't want you financing that type of luxury purchase because you might be getting bigger than your wallet can actually afford, so don't fall into that trap.
So, okay, we said you ought to look at the liability section. You ought to make sure you have a grasp on that, but that's probably not the one you get excited about. The one you get excited about is the assets, the things that you own, because in your 20s, a little bit can go a long, long way.
Yeah, we had to get past all the traps of consumerism, so now we can get into actually building wealth, and that is the asset side of your net worth statement. So this is the part, I'm going to go ahead and lay out that big goal that you need to be shooting for. You need to be trying to save 20 to 25% of your gross income. I said gross, not net. You want to take what you are paid, multiply it by 20%, multiply it by 25%, somewhere in that range. And by the way, if you make under $100,000 as an individual, $200,000 as a couple, you can count your employer match in that 20-25%. But your goal is you're trying to get the process of systematic savings going so your army of dollar bills can start replacing eventually what you have to do with your hands, your back, and your brain. You're going to let your money work just as hard as you do.
Now, even though the goal is 20 to 25%, don't let that be a deterrent where you say, oh, if I can't do that, I'm just not going to do anything. Because remember, in your 20s, a little bit goes a long way. You can start somewhere. If you can't do 20%, do 5%. And then next year, try to do 6, try to do 7. If you want some motivation, go out to our website, go to moneyguy.com/resources. We actually have a deliverable there called How Powerful Are Your Dollars? If you want to see what every dollar can turn into you by the time you turn 65, go print out the deliverable because it will blow your mind.
Yeah, because that's where, in a minute, we're going to talk about 88 times over, and we'll really show you how powerful that deliverable is going to be, a really driving force to motivate you.
Yep.
I also think while you're on the resource page, I want you, and you can hear the paper in the background because I'm old school, I print, but you can go get the electronic version, moneyguide.com/resources. I want you to go download the financial order of operations because while we're focusing on assets, I also want you to be focusing on building emergency reserves. You got to have some liquidity. We saw in the year 2020 when the pandemic happened, it's nice to have liquidity so that you can have the ability to pay bills in case you're not able to work, so that you can buy groceries for your family. All this stuff will be important. This is financial order of operations steps 1 and 4. A few grand really is going to help you cover the insurance deductibles. Make sure you can cover any emergencies that come your way. You'll be in a much better place with emergency reserves.
Now, one thing we talk about all the time, Brian, is when we start talking about this idea of the army of dollar bills, we always talk about the when is way more important than the how, right? When I start saving is way more important than what I'm buying and how I'm investing, and it's because of this concept that we've come up with called 88 times over.
Yeah, well, 88 times over, if you think about it, this is motivated, and I know you guys have heard this story, but I will say it for our newcomers. This is what changed my life. I had a high school teacher tell me if I saved $100 a month, I could be a millionaire by the time I retired. Didn't believe it. I was like, I could save $100 a month. Guys, it was even better than what was shared with me because the number, if you are 20 years of age, realize I was like 17, 18 years old in high school, is less than $100 for a 20-year-old. And that what's even crazier to me is if you think about the fact that the lion's share, I'm talking about, I believe it's like 95%. We have it on the chart, but it is 95% of that $1 million is not from money I've saved. It's from the army of dollar bills growing. My contribution is only 5% of that $1 million. It's really an incredible thing.
Yeah, Brian, I think it's absolutely incredible that it only takes $95 a month to get to $1 million by the time you turn 65. And what I get so excited about, especially for young folks, is when not only are they building up like emergency reserves and that kind of thing, when they're taking advantage of vehicles like a Roth IRA that grows completely tax-free. So when they get their $1 million and go to pull it out, it is tax-free forever.
And think about the employer match where it's dollar for dollar or 50 cents on the dollar match from your employer. That is practically free money. Here's the thing I think is interesting for 20-somethings. You probably look at your older peers and you're jealous because you see them with the fancier cars, you see them with the nice houses. Here's what I want you to understand. Keep your eye on the ball to understand if you do this right, if you maximize your army of dollars, you will not only have all the things they have in your 30s, 40s, you'll have more. It's just don't get your order wrong. You've got to focus on building those base level assets so that your money starts growing for you. The opportunity cost is huge. And that's a great transition to kind of do a wealth spot check. Where should people actually be in their 20s?
This is great. So we wanted to look at two different things. We want to say first, where are the average Americans in their 20s? And this is what we found. This is the average median income. So if you look at the median income from age 21 all the way, or from 20 all the way to 29, the average median income comes in at $28,197. If you look at the average median net worth across that age range, it's just under $8,000. If you want to be an average accumulator of wealth, and you hear us talk about this all the time, there's a formula you can do. You take your age times your income divided by 10 plus the number of years until you're 40. I'll say that again. So if you're a 25-year-old, you would take your age times your income divided by 10 plus 15. So divided by 25 will tell you if you're an average accumulator of wealth. So if we would take a 25-year-old here and we know their income and we know their age, we would say if they want to be average, they should have a net worth at 25 of around $28,000.
Here's the thing. I don't pick on people too much because, you see an average median net worth of $7,864. This is your first decade.
It's your first decade.
This is the part I'm telling you. You're just trying to start the foundational habits that will lead you to success. This is not the decade that I pick on you for not keeping up with these numbers. This is where I just want you to start the habit of wealth building. And I'm telling you, you're going to get addicted to saving and it's going to start happening for you. But I still think it's nice to be aspirational.
Sure.
You should want to know, what are financial mutants doing? What are the people at the top of my peer group, the top 25%? What are they actually doing?
Yeah, this is what we found. The top 25% of income earners in their 20s are earning $44,660. If you want to look at the top 25% net worth, it's actually right at $43,000. So I think it's really unique. The average median net worth is right at $8,000, but if you want to be in the top tier, if you want to be sort of the cream of the crop, their net worth is about $43,000. And if you just do the prodigious accumulative wealth number, so age times income divided by 10 plus the number of years until 40, and then multiply that times 2, a prodigious accumulative wealth in their 20s should have a net worth of just under $90,000.
Yeah, and I think here's what's cool. We use the Millionaire Net Worth formula. That's where that formula that Bo's giving comes from. But we did an adjustment in there because everybody under 40, you probably, when you see the Millionaire Next Door formula, you get frustrated. I have not had enough time to start building assets. That's why we have the denominator is 10 plus how many years until you reach 40. We make that little slight adjustment until you're age 40 that gives you a chance to show you where you should be.
All right, so we're going to work through our 20s. Now we're moving into a new decade. We're moving into the 30s, and we've just called this the breakthrough. Now, in previous shows, we talk about how this could be like the messy middle or the hard time because you have all these things going on. But really, when you think about it from a wealth building standpoint, this is where your dollars start to get a little bit of steam behind them.
Yeah, no doubt. Life is getting more complicated, but it's also a time to have some celebrations because you're starting to get some traction in your career. You're starting to get some of those adulting side effects, is meaning that you might be getting married, you might have children, you have your first house purchase is typically in your early 30s. So these are all some of the things that are coming your way. That's why we call this the breakthrough. So if we were actually trying to figure out net worth wise, what part of the net worth statement should we focus on in our 30s? The first thing, and this was kind of interesting when we came up with this in show notes, because everybody, when you think net worth, you think, okay, assets minus liabilities equals my net worth. We didn't start there, Bo.
We did not start
We
there.
actually started with what? Footnotes. Notes that you should put at the bottom of your net worth statement. What do we mean by that?
The reason we think the footnotes are so important is because of exactly what you just said. Maybe in your 30s you're getting married. Maybe in your 30s you're starting to have kids. What we're saying is really now your life isn't just based on you. There are other people that are now depending on you. So you want to make sure that you have all of the appropriate risk mitigation measures in place. You want to make sure that you do have your life insurance in place. You do want to have your wills in place. You don't want to have those things. Well, they don't normally find themselves on the net worth statement. They're not an asset. They're not a liability. So they tend to be a footnote at the bottom or on the second page.
I think it's interesting. I just saw this on Twitter in the last hour or two, is that there were more cash value life insurance policies than there were than term.
Really?
And so this is something I want to tell my 30-year-olds. There's a good chance that you need those assets. You need the income to be allocated out efficiently because you've got kiddos, you've got a spouse, you're trying to buy the house, plus you're trying to build the savings habit of having army of dollar bills building for the future. You're just trying to prevent, if you got taken out on a Tuesday afternoon, that you don't leave behind a big mess for your family. Term life insurance is actually probably one of the most effective ways to do that. So I make that statement just to understand that you might want to go look at just some simplistic benchmark rules that you see out there in the industry. 10 times your income.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you go look at 10 times your income, go look at 20-year, 30-year term, I think you'll find it's much more affordable because you're basically buying just the cost of the insurance. You're not trying to overpay now so that when you get to be 70 years old, that all those overpayments cover the increased cost of the insurance. We're not worried about that just now. We're just trying to cover the insurable need that you have.
And so obviously life insurance covers the big thing. It covers the financial responsibility. But if something were to happen to both you and your spouse, you want to make sure that you have stuff in place that'll say what happens to the kids, what happens to the assets, what are my ultimate wishes. That's why estate documents are so important. And unfortunately, it's a weird conversation to have. Okay, if something happens to us, who's going to watch the kids? If you think it's difficult for you to have that conversation while you're here and can speak for yourself, imagine how difficult it's going to be for the rest of your family to try to figure it out. That's why we hate seeing people in the 30s neglect this because it is so, so important. Hopefully you do them, you get them filled out. You never need to use them, but they're in place just in case.
Let's transition to beyond the footnotes. Let's talk about liabilities. We started this, even though it's not the top of your net worth statement, liabilities are still one of a big concern I think you have in your 30s because this is the time you're buying a house.
Sure.
So you want to make sure, because your biggest expenses are like automobiles, houses, but these are also huge financial traps where if you have all of your monthly budget going to those two big purchases, what's left for you to actually save and build your army of dollars? That's why we give you the guidance. your mortgage plus your housing expenses should really not exceed 25% of your gross income.
That's exactly right.
Now, a lot of people on the coastal communities, you're like 25%, that's laughable. We probably need to spend 35%. I get it. I'm going to give you a little bit of grace on this, but understand if you take 10% here of that grace, you better be cutting somewhere else so that we can continue to build the savings habit.
Now, notice what we said there. We didn't say, oh, if you have a mortgage in your liability column, your goal should be to pay that mortgage off as quickly as possible. In your 30s, in our opinion, that should not be your goal. Your goal should be to make sure that your mortgage is an appropriate amount and it falls in less than 25% of your gross income.
Other big purchase, cars.
Yep.
We talked about this for 20s, but I'll quickly repeat it again. 23.8, 20% down payment. Don't finance for more than 3 years or 36 months on the amortization. Cannot be more than 8% of your gross income. And here's the other two caveats. You do not want your monthly investments to be less than your monthly car payment. If you got those two backwards, meaning you have like $1,000 a month car payment and only $200 a month going into your Roth IRA, you're doing it all wrong. Make sure that the investments are bigger than the car payment. Also, if you get those luxury brands, you better be treating it same as cash. Essentially, have it paid off within 12 months.
So then we want to move on to the asset side, to the exciting side. Now, in your 20s, we talked about you want to be looking for an emergency fund. You want to be moving towards that. In your 30s, it's a non-negotiable. You have to make sure that you have your liquid cash covered. 3 to 6 months of living expenses in cash. Usually it hangs out right there at the top of your net worth statement. You got to make sure you check that box before you begin building the rest of the asset column.
When we get to investments, it's interesting. In the 20s, I gave a lot of latitude, and I said, look, I want you to be able to, work towards saving 20%, maybe 25%, but it's also aspirational in your 20s. In your 30s, guys, this is the time it's got to happen. You've got to make sure you're getting 20 to 25% of your gross income working for you through your army of dollar bills. It can come from your employer retirement plan and come from your Roth IRA. Just make sure you have investments that are building your army of dollar bills.
The other thing that I think is so beautiful, and it's a magical thing that I think happens for a lot of folks in their 30s, is your net worth statement, if you're doing it right, should look a lot different at 31 than it does at 39. It's almost a tale of two net worth statements. And one of the things that you'll recognize as you're doing your annual net worth statement, you'll start to see the critical mass of your assets grow year over year over year. Well, one of the things your net worth statement might inform you of is, okay, am I at the level now where it makes sense for me to graduate past an automated investing, automated financial planning solution?
Yeah, because we love, 20s, 30s. I love people. This is why it's a great time to be alive and a great time to be a builder of wealth. We have what's called index target retirement funds. All you have to come up with is, how much can I save? When do I need the money? When do I think I'm retiring? What's my financial independence period? If you can come up with those two periods, just go buy an index target retirement fund from somebody like Vanguard, Fidelity Investments. These are incredible opportunities. Those are the leading providers of it. However, you're going to reach a level probably around 400,000, maybe 500,000, somewhere in there, where you're going to say, you know what? I need a little more attention to the asset allocation.
Sure.
I also need to focus on tax diversification, or what's called tax location, meaning I want my fixed income in those tax deferred accounts because I go get taxed at ordinary income. I want my Roth IRA to have the best growth assets whatsoever. And then I want my taxable account not only to have liquidity, but I also want to make sure they have the dividends. They have the long-term capital gains, all the things that have some tax favorability. Focus on that. And then don't forget, tax loss harvesting as well as capital gain planning, meaning that you could even get into charitable planning, charitable giving. There's all kind of cool things that you could help navigate those large financial decisions with.
Yeah, and if you are making large financial decisions, it's perfectly fine if you're using resources like the Money Guy or other resources out there. But if you do find that the gravity of the decisions you're making is maybe more than you want to bear on your own, it's not a bad time to start thinking about reaching out to a financial advisor, start thinking about working with someone who can help you on that journey. So this is the other thing that I love about the 30s. We said this is kind of that decade where your assets start to catch steam and you actually start to have some momentum behind you, but still your dollars are powerful in your 30s. We said that for a 20-year-old, you only have to save $95 a month to get to $1 million by 65. Well, for a 30-year-old, you only have to save $270 a month. That's still more than the 95, but not a ton when you think about over an entire working career. You could have $1 million saved. And if you're just saving $270 per month, 89% of that $1 million is comprised of growth. It's your army of dollar bills working upon itself to generate wealth for you.
That's the big takeaway. 11% of your $1 million is you. The other 89% is coming from your army of dollars working just as hard, if not even harder than you.
Yep.
Don't blow that opportunity, because you're going to find out the most valuable resource in that equation is the time that these assets had in the market. Not timing the market, as Bo always says, but time in the market.
That's right.
So focus on those. And now this is probably a great point. You're trying to figure out, where do I fit in? What's my spot check? Where should I be? I know, according to Fidelity, they think 30-year-olds should have like 1 times your gross salary saved.
So whatever
up.
you make in a year, they should have 1 times annual gross salary if you're 30. Well, we said let's take it even a step further. Let's talk about someone sort of in their mid-30s, around age 35. And this is what we found. The average median income for someone in their 30s is a touch under $48,000 a year. The average median net worth is right at $45,000. So
Fidelity
it
was
aligns
spot on.
pretty closely. Well, if you want to be an average accumulator of wealth, you want to take your age times your income divided by 10 plus however many years you have until 40. So if you're a 35-year-old, you would divide by 15. You can see that an average accumulator of wealth should have a net worth. This includes all of your investments, all your home equity, all your assets, of a little over $111,000 a year.
But that's not financial mutants.
That's not financial
average accumulators of wealth. When we get into the financial mutants column, you can quickly see that income jumps up to $76,000 a year. The net worth for the top 25%, mid-30s, about $172,000, $173,000.
I think what's so remarkable there is if you just look at the average, it's about 1 times annual salary. You can see the folks who tend to be higher income, at least if you want to fall in the top 25% category, they're doing a great job of turning that higher income into wealth. They're not just at 1 time salary, they're at greater than 2 times salary, which is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, and think about it, because this is also 35-year-olds. That's why, we celebrate those median Americans, but they're really kind of behind, because this is a 35-year-old is what we base these numbers off of. The prodigious accumulator. Remember, we've talked about that modified Millionaire Next Door formula where you take your age times your income divided by 10 plus how many years are you from 40? Well, in your 30s, it's a lot less. It's less than 10. So you can see still a prodigious accumulator is somebody who has that Millionaire Next Door formula times 2. That number comes in for the financial mutants right around $356,000.
So if you are someone in your mid-30s and you are over that 350 mark, you are doing great. Keep on the path, because those dollars are going to be so powerful as you continue to build towards financial independence.
And if you're behind, use this as your chance. I'm telling you, the 20s and 30s are your opportunities. Get excited, get engaged. You're not behind. You can do this still. You just have to kind of wake it up, let your army of dollar bills start doing the heavy lifting for you.
Yep.
Let's talk about something I resemble. 40s. I'm going to miss the days when
I'm
this
about to
goes
say,
away.
you only have a little bit longer you get to say that, but I love it.
So this is the part, it really is a fork in the road moment. We have, if you've done it right, if you've found something like the Money Guy Show and you started saving in your 20s and even 30s, you're probably getting to your 40s and be like, this is a celebration. This is when I can start looking at how my army of dollars has started building. This might also be the time if you've actually just ignored all of that and you're kind of late to the game. And I'm not trying to scare you. I'm just trying to tell you, you have to get very purposeful if you're behind, because I don't want you to get on the bitter train.
That's right.
This is the age where I find people have the midlife crises. This is the age where they start telling younger people, their coworkers, all the system's against you. And it's not. I don't want you to get on the bitter train. I want you to get inspired so you can actually start creating wealth for yourself as well.
So if you are someone in your 40s and you're beginning to do your net worth statement, or you're starting your net worth statement, we've talked about how earlier in your life you want to focus at the different components. This is the part where you want to start looking at the bottom line. In your 40s, you really do care about, what is my net worth? If I take all the things that I own and I subtract out all the things I owe, what is my net worth? That's where you want to focus your effort and attention in your 40s.
Well, you got to have a plan. I mean, it's one of the things we're just and you just said this, Bo, we're focused in the 20s and 30s on the components. And that's kind of like in a financial plan. You don't, because a financial plan is going to have retirement planning, it's going to have estate planning, it's going to have college planning for the kiddos, it's going to have all that encompassed. It's not just those individual
That's right.
pieces. If you're in your 40s and you're looking at your spouse, or you're kind of looking at your net worth statement that you just created, and you go, man, this thing doesn't feel like it's cohesive. It's not working together. I don't really know what I'm working to. I don't know what my why is.
Sure.
You've got a problem. Focus on what the financial plan is for you. In your 40s, this is so important, because you're starting to also realize, hey, I kind of can see when retirement's going to be, or when I don't even have to use the word retire. I just want to be financially independent. I better make sure the components are lined up to get me to where I need to be.
Now, the beautiful thing about having that plan in place is that if you've had the plan in place in your 40s, it gives you an opportunity to say, okay, I'm at the place where I want to maybe take my foot off the pedal. Maybe I can back down. Maybe my plan is ahead of where I thought it would be. Or if you're someone doing this and maybe you're behind, this is the moment where you get to say, okay, I can still adjust course. It's not too late. There's a fork in the road, and I can choose to maybe take the harder path, maybe take the harder road, but I still have plenty of time for financial independence and wealth building, even in my 40s.
Well, and this is, you can do spot checks, you can do safe withdrawal rates, figuring out what you think you want to have in retirement, how many years you are to get there, spot check it. But also, I want to give one more lens, because I think this is a decade of clarity of your mindset. Is I want you to look through every decision you make in your 40s as, what is this decision going to do 10 years, 15, 20
That's
years?
great.
Because this is the decade I worried about divorce. I worried about midlife crises. I worry about, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Yep.
And the fact that, you're always going to have somebody that has more money. Should you buy the second house? I mean, should you upgrade to your big house that you're already raising the kids in? Because think about, I'm getting to be in my upper 40s. Kids are getting older.
Yep.
Is this the time that I need the much bigger house? I don't know, because we've kind of passed the biggest years that I'm going to have all these kiddos running around. These are things I want you to think about, because you can derail your long-term success by kind of keep growing the lifestyle when it really doesn't even match your why and what the purpose of what you're trying to do with your finances.
Now, as much as I like to give you a hard time here, Brian, 40s is still young. In the game of life, 40s is not exactly super long in the tooth. And because of that, your money still has a lot of power behind it. Even if you're starting at zero and you say, you know what, I want to be a millionaire by the time I reach 65, and I've got a 25 or less year time horizon, you got to save a little under $800 a month. It comes into about $780 a month every month from 40 all the way until 65 to be a millionaire. But what's beautiful is, if you get there and you have that $1 million, 77% was still growth. Way more than half of your total portfolio is comprised of your army of dollar bills still working upon itself. There's still a lot of juice in those pipes.
Well, I think it's interesting, because I probably gave a little tough love at the beginning of this decade, because I'm telling you, it's a fork in the road moment. If you did it right in your 20s and 30s, there's people who are brand new to the Money Guy family watching this in their 40s, and they're like, gosh, he just hit me hard. I mean, I kind of feel like my jaw got a toothache right there.
Sore.
But then we show a slide like this where still 77% of the growth that can come from your ultimate net worth at retirement can still come from your army of dollars. Guys, it's still time. Make it happen. You still have potential to really get involved, make your money work as hard as you do. Don't let this opportunity pass you by.
All right, so let's do a little spot check. We know that Fidelity said that for a 30-year-old, they should have about 1 times their annual salary saved. Now, what's Fidelity say for someone who's 40?
They say 3 times.
3 times.
I mean, it is what it is. You're going to start noticing the Money Guy family starts kind of going just like we have a fork in the road moment. I'm starting to think they might be a little, I'm a financial mutant creator. I want you to have tremendous success. 3 times starts to feel a little low in my book, but we'll go with it right now.
So Fidelity says you should be at 3 times. Well, if we look at the average American in their 40s, the average median income is about $51,000 a year. Well, if you look at the average median net worth, it's about $146,000 a year. So we are close to 3 times.
It's very
right
average.
in there. It's very
average.
If you want to be an average accumulator of wealth, you don't get to use the Money Guy formula anymore. You have to use the true formula: age times income divided by 10. An average accumulator of wealth in their 40s ought to have a net worth of around $231,000. but I don't think that's quite enough.
No, let's talk about that top 25%. The financial mutants, what are they doing? They make a little bit more money. They're right under $89,000. That's the top 25% income. Their net worth is right around $402,000. And then, but here's the thing. And look, I'm going to pick on even my financial mutants. We have it's 402,000, but the prodigious, if you want to have 2 times, if you remember, if you take the formula, Millionaire Next Door formula, you take the income of 88,000 times your age, divide it by 10, we're showing that this thing should be right under $800,000. There's some work to do. So just focus on building those assets,
You know,
guys.
what this shows me is like in your 40s, you may not quite be there yet, but you should be approaching millionaire status if you want to be one of the financial mutants. This is kind of where you might make that cross into 7-figure territory.
Well, and I don't mind sharing. I always had the goal when I hit 30, I wanted to make $100,000 income. I didn't make it. I think I missed it by about a year on that one. When I was 40, I wanted to be 7 figures, meaning over $1 million, liquid net worth, not counting housing. I wanted it to be investment assets. I missed that by less than a year, but it was still, I missed it by a few months. It is something that I think it's good to be aspirational. Give yourself goals of what you want to do in your 30s, what you want to do in your 40s, and that way you have something to measure yourself by. That's why you got to be doing these annual net worth statements.
Yep. All right, so then we move on into the next decade, the 50s. And in my opinion, Brian, there's sort of a paradigm shift. The thing changes in your 50s as opposed to the things you were focused on and thinking about in your 20s and your 30s and your 40s. Because in your 50s, it's about finishing the puzzle. It's about getting the final pieces put into place of your financial independence puzzle.
You've been working on this for decades now. So it is one of those things where the edges should be built, just like you build a puzzle by focusing on the outer edges, and then you start letting it kind of build within. This is going to be the part where there's only a few pieces left and you're going and grabbing them and putting them right in there. There's a reason we create these type of visuals and we ask FTE Daniel to do them, is because this is the part, and let's go ahead and hone this into your specific net worth statement. We first want to focus on assets.
Yep.
What I think about that is, and Bo, this is where I think you can add a lot of detail coming from a CFA background. We talk about that just like we've had target retirement funds in the past, by the time you get in your 50s, that's probably not doing it because you need to be thinking about asset location. What do we mean by that?
You need to be thinking about what types of accounts you hold, what types of assets in, because realistically, in the next 10, 15, 20 years, you're going to start pulling those assets out. Well, how efficiently you can begin pulling those assets out is a direct derivative of how efficiently you've begun building those assets. So you want to make sure you have the right types of investments and the right types of account buckets so that when you do get to financial independence, when you do get to retirement, you can begin pulling the levers in the way that leaves you in maximum control.
And you made a great observation. This is probably about a month ago. You said, you know what, Brian, you're an accountant, a nerdy accountant. You said, y'all have this inventory system that you learn in accounting called LIFO.
Yep.
Where it's last in, first out. I think it is very brilliant that you talked about and you made the analogy that it's very interesting that when you're funding your retirement accounts, when we talk about tax deferred, tax free, and after tax, we kind of pull our assets out in retirement exactly like we put them in, meaning that the first thing that goes into your retirement savings is like your Roth assets. You love that tax-free growth. That is going to be the last place you want to pull out of. So you'll find as you build, you go from tax-free, then you do the tax-deferred so you can get that employer match. And then kind of the last thing, and it probably is happening in your 40s and 50s, you're thinking about where am I going to get my money from? So you start saving in those after-tax brokerage account type savings accounts. That's going to be one of the first places you probably will pull out of when you retire. So focus on those type of things, and I think you'll understand this type of planning is so important.
Yeah, you ought to be looking at your net worth statement saying, okay, are there some like advanced planning things I ought to be thinking about in my 50s or to set me up for what I will be doing in my 60s? Should I be looking at funding deferred compensation plans? Should I be looking at Roth conversion? Should I be looking at age 55 401k rules? What are the things I ought to be paying attention to? Because for a 20-year-old, those things are way, way, way in the future. For a 50-year-old, you can see the landing strip. Your landing gear might not be down yet, but you can see it. You can see the airfield. You want to make sure you're cruising in for a smooth landing.
I internalize this personally is that as I'm quickly approaching 50, one of the few things, just like you get to an age, you start getting discounts on food and other things because you're officially a senior citizen. I do think it's something aspirational to know that once, as soon as the year you're going to turn 50, you get catch-up contributions on your IRA contributions, your
birthday
401ks. There's all kind of little added things that the government's like, hey, knock, knock, knock. You're going to retire in a few years. We're going to give you a little special provision so you can save even more money in retirement. So don't blow that opportunity as well.
So not only do we think you ought to focus on the assets portion of your net worth statement, because ultimately your assets are what's going to kind of generate the income that you're going to live off of in retirement. But the other thing you want to focus on is you want to go back to your footnotes now. And now when you look at your footnotes, it's less about the risk mitigation footnotes, the life insurance and the estate documents and that sort of thing. And it's more about the source of income footnotes. Have I been paying into Social Security my entire career? And what will that benefit look like for me? Do I have a pension? Are there other sources of income? Because we don't get to list those on our assets. They have to show up somewhere, though, because they do need to be part of your overall financial plan.
Also, this is the part when you're in your 50s, you got to pay attention to risk.
Yeah, for sure.
You got to, because I tell you, this is one of the biggest things when we have prospects come in, and I see a lot of comments on our YouTube channel that talk about what their portfolio is. And there's this new movement now where you want to be 100% equity. And I get it. Interest rates so low. We're all just, what do we do with our money to actually grow it? I will tell you, there does become a balancing act of not only building wealth, but keeping wealth. So don't be so optimistic that you blow past your big win by not understanding that you do need to start thinking about that kind of glide path on your asset allocation, that you take a little risk off the table. So that gets a little more complicated because it's so specialized to everybody out there based upon what you have your assets in, meaning that are you in tax deferred, tax free, after tax, what's your risk profile, what's your goals. It's very customizable. And that's why this is probably also another thing that's not on the net worth. It's more of a footnote. Are you working with somebody professionally to make sure that you're answering these big decisions?
Now, when you get into your 50s, especially as you approach your later 50s, there's a chance you might be reaching that precipice of financial independence. Your net worth statement might be quote unquote complete. Now, don't mishear me. We have a lot of retired folks who still do the net worth statement every year because it's a lot of fun, and we would argue you should do the same. But this is a good point where maybe you want to start thinking about like an after-action review to your wealth building. You actually see everything that you've built up and start thinking, okay, have I stress tested this? How do I know that this is going to be the thing that's going to provide for me for the rest of my life?
Well, yeah, I think a lot of what I call do-it-yourself planners, especially I'm looking at you fire folks, you use the safe withdrawal rate because that's cool. You can take your total assets, multiply it by the safe withdrawal rate. That's the money you think you can pull out, and it's going to last for decades.
Sure.
And it sounds good, but it's not really stress testing. And I've got a great analogy on this because it hit me while I was working on show notes, is that I love going to the fair and riding rides.
Okay.
But there's a big difference between riding a fair ride and riding a roller coaster like Disney World.
Yeah, those are a little bit
because
different.
Look, the fair ride, the roller coaster, Disney World, both fun, but one is just a little bit safer, something I would really want to rely and stake my life on. And the fact, and that's going to be probably the
Disney's
Disney
the
ride.
safer one, right?
Disney is definitely the safer
one
one because there's a lot more going into it. I mean, they're not packing this thing up and moving it around every few weeks. And that's what a safe withdrawal rate is great for back of the napkin type planning. But as you actually get into your 50s and you've got to fine tune this, once again, focus points towards a financial advisor. Those Monte Carlo simulations you're talking about, not only are you using linear growth like what a safe withdrawal rate and other things will help you through, it's also just stress testing to make sure you're not getting in a bad situation. That's why I make that analogy. I'd much rather you go ahead and get the retirement plan, a Disney Plus It type retirement plan, instead of a roadie type carnival that is going around getting assembled on the back of a napkin. This is the time, this is way too important to let it be something that, it's probably safe because it works most of the time, but I want it to be guaranteed to pretty much be safe so I can get to the other side of retirement and financial independence well.
And what you want to make sure of is that you're thinking about this early enough, because it's okay if you have a surprise when you're 5-10 years out from retirement. What you don't want to do is you don't say, you know what, I listened to that Money Guy show, and I heard them. So I think I'm going to go meet with a financial advisor. And they sit down with the financial advisor and say, hey, you know what? I'm retiring this year. Just wanted you to check and tell me it's okay. Because you've actually been in that meeting before. I know the story. You've been in that meeting before.
I've had to make people work 3 to 4 years additional.
You would rather know that early on in your 50s or mid-50s instead of figuring that out at 64 when you've already started, making all your vacation plans, planning on your work exit.
It's much more fun if you're getting to do, and this is the kind of the closeout part I have on this section is if you've got financial independence, meaning we have that meeting, I tell you, you know what? You don't need to be focusing on where you can cut. You need to be focusing on how you want to spend your money in financial independence. Do you want to go hike the Appalachian Trail? Do you want to take the family on a vacation? Those things are so much more fun to plan for, but you don't get to that congratulations moment without doing the heavy lifting much earlier. So don't skip steps because it is tough. Yeah, you might have saved a lot of money or can potentially fees and other things, but you really, if you get to retirement and you find out that you just didn't know what you didn't know, or you get to the point and you just didn't have everything prepared like you thought, that can cause a lot of heartache later. So don't fall into that. Let's talk about liabilities because I think it's interesting. I didn't really pick on it a ton this year, but there is something that happens, I think, in 20s, 30s, 40s. I'm one of these people on debts, especially like mortgage debt. I tell people don't get in a hurry to pay that off because especially in an environment like we're in currently where you can get a mortgage rate in the 2s, why would you want to get in a hurry to pay that off when you might need to be focusing on Roth IRAs and other things? But I do think once you cross into your later 40s, definitely in your 50s, it's once again, it's not about wealth maximization. It's about keeping wealth, not just getting wealthy. It's about keeping wealth. And one of the things is taking risk off the table. I know for a fact, if you look at financial independence, encumbrances, in a dictionary, independence and encumbrances are in two different places. So I want you to think about, this is me giving you permission. In your 50s, assuming you've done everything you're supposed to, it's perfectly fine to pay off those low interest debts.
Love it. All right, so let's do a quick wealth spot check. Now, remember, I think there's a paradigm shift that happens in the 50s. But first, let's kind of look at where the average Americans are. So the average median income for someone in their 50s is about $54,000 a year. Average median net worth is about $182,000 per year. And so if you want to be an average accumulator of wealth, you take that income times the age, and in this case, 55, divide by 10. Average accumulator should be about $298,000. Well, we started thinking, when you're in your 50s, it's really less about your overall net worth and more about what your savings actually looks like, more about what your liquid net worth looks like. So when you think about a financial mutant, we can talk about their income. They make a little bit more. They make about $92,000 per year if you look at the top 25%. Or their net worth is around $570,000 per year, the top 25%. But we think you ought to think about income multiples. When you think about your annual income, in your 50s, you ought to be thinking about how many times over do I have my annual income saved? And so we just mathematically figured out if we assume a 4% withdrawal rate at retirement, and we back that down based on when you're retiring, that when you are 55 years old, you ought to have 11.6 times your annual income saved up in liquid investments.
Yeah, that's a big part of it because, you're getting to the point as you can see the landing strip ahead. You do want to start focusing on where are my assets in relationship to my living expenses. And at 55, it's probably might be a little too soon to where your income can tell you exactly where your living expenses will be. So income is a good indicator, and we like 11 to 12 times your income. And that is using, as you said, 4 to 4.5% safe withdrawal rate. Take those things into account. This is important things to really measure to see where you stack up and are you prepared to take that step into financial independence.
Absolutely. All right, so now let's talk about the last decade. This is the 60s, and a lot of folks think, it's retirement. It's the end of the journey. It's the culmination. It's the final point. We don't think this is new beginnings. This is the beginning of a new and exciting journey in your financial life.
I just had a comment this week says, hey, I just retired. I just got out of the Matrix, meaning that they made the equation. And by the way, I just showed this movie to my daughter from the 90s, Keanu Reeves, The Matrix. It is interesting that I think you could take that visualization, even that movie creates, is that this is the new beginning. Is that, and we've done a show recently. We even had a deliverable on it. If you go to moneyguy.com/resources, the Money Guide to Retirement, we talk about how do you do this well.
Love it.
This is the 9 steps to know that you're doing retirement right. Focus on this because this is the start of the golden age for you. You want to make sure you understand what you're getting into. And let's talk about what are the parts of your net worth statement that you ought to focus on. The first thing is assets.
Yeah, hopefully you're getting to the point where assets might be the only part of your net worth statement. Hopefully you've zeroed out the liabilities. So this is where you get to see, can I start executing on the plan that I've been putting together for the last 20, 30, 40 years?
Yeah, so this is the part, since we've created the plans, you better measure twice, cut once, get a full retirement plan analysis done so that you know exactly how successful you're going to be with what you've created. I also like the fact that this is the time where you get to celebrate that you've done it.
Yep.
You've lived like no one else previously. You've taken a little bit of your previous earlier years, since you can have that great, big, beautiful tomorrow. Take advantage of that. And then, by the way, this is another big shift, cash reserves.
It's a huge one. That top piece of the assets column, you know, it used to be okay to have 3 to 6 months, but once you do get into retirement, once you do get into financial independence, once you are living off of your assets, there's a shift. You probably do need to have 12 to 18 months of liquid cash available to you, and maybe even more in conservative, accessible, with minimal loss of principal assets. You want to make sure you have enough that no matter what the markets are doing, no matter what the economy is doing, you can still sleep at night and enjoy retirement.
Yeah, so that's why having excess liquidity is going to give you that
Absolutely.
peace of mind through that. So let's talk about footnotes. These are the risk management specific things that I want to focus on. This is probably the time in your 60s. I know it's taboo to have this conversation, but start letting the adult children know a little bit about what's going on with your financial life. If you can start that communication dialogue in your 60s, it's definitely going to be much easier than when you're in your 80s. So go ahead and start easing into that process.
Also, understand the difference in risk tolerance and risk capacity. Maybe you are an entrepreneur. Maybe you are a high-flying investor and you are super aggressive in your working years. Well, just because you can stomach that risk doesn't mean that in your 60s, you ought to be taking that risk. Your portfolio may not have the capacity for those wild fluctuations. So this might be the time that you do start to take some risk off the table, less because of your tolerance and more because of where you are in your financial life cycle.
And I'll say it simply is that it's not about the journey of just creating wealth. It's about keeping that wealth too. And that's why risk is such a big component of that. And a part of that, I'll say this is a risk, is withdrawal rates are too high. Maybe you are one of these people that you think, you know what? I'm going to have a withdrawal rate of like 8%. I mean, you could find that it's great while markets are doing well, but you could run into a sequence of return risk, meaning that you have a bear market on top of some other bad years that come with your investments, and it blows up your entire retirement plan. Be very careful to understanding how retirement withdrawal rates, as well as Monte Carlo simulations and doing a full retirement plan, all kind of work together. These are all tools that should give you a very successful financial independence journey.
All right, so let's talk about a spot check. How do you know if you're on track? Well, for median Americans, the average median income is about $52,500. The average median net worth is a little over $250,000. And to be an average accumulative wealth in your 60s, that income, you want to have about $341,000 saved up. However, financial mutants are a little bit different. Their average, their top 25% income of folks in their 60s make about $93,000 per year. The top 25% of net worth is about $772,000. But in our opinion, if you want to be at financial independence at 65, you want to have about 22 to 23 times your annual expenses saved up in retirement.
And this is probably, something that people ask me about footnotes, specifically like Social Security, pensions. How does that work out with my withdrawals and my assets? Is, guys, take what those living expenses are, adjust those down for the Social Securities and the pensions. That's going to give you a much clearer picture on, is that 22 to 25 times living expenses actually covered by your assets. That's the best way to kind of think about it.
I get so excited for New Year's, Brian, and I think the reason is because It is the closeout of one year. 2020 is certainly a year we're all happy to close out. But I'm excited to do my net worth statement. It's been a year where the market has performed pretty well. We're going to kind of look at it and see what it looks like, and then it allows you to set goals for next year. If you're not out there tracking this, how can you possibly know if you are on the curve, ahead of the curve, behind the curve? It's a wonderful exercise to begin writing down your financial goals and tracking them in a year-over-year basis. And once you've done it for 5, 7, 10, 12, 15 years, it is so fun to look back on your journey.
Yeah, I mean, that's the part. As you get older, you do get more sentimental as memories blossom. We talk about that a lot. And I do love the fact that if you start the annual tradition of doing an annual net worth statement, guys, I'm telling you exactly what Bo said. You can do this with your spouse. You can do it. It might sound really hokey, but I'm telling you, it will be just incredibly fulfilling, enjoyable to see how far you've come. And you'll also find when you're looking at that net worth statement from 15, 20 years ago, you kind of get visualizations of what you were struggling with, where the kids were, what were the big things going on with your job that you thought, oh my goodness, this is going to blow up everything. And then you look back now and go, we made it. There's fulfillment. And that's the biggest part. Everybody always talks about, I want my money to make me happy. What they really are saying, they're not talking about happiness where they're covering just the basics. They're talking about fulfillment, meaning you know what your why is, and your money reflects that, because money's just a tool, guys. You're going to find if your goal is just to get a big pot of money, say you want to have 5 million, 10 million, 100 million, I don't care what your number is, you might find it's emptier than you planned if you don't have a purpose, if you don't have a why. So that's why if you'll go through these things, build a journey, you're going to find that you have wisdom. That's why I tell people, you build those levels of wealth, those stages of wealth, you build along a healthy journey and a healthy relationship with money. And that's what we're trying to create here with the Money Guy Show. Guys, if you like this and you're like, man, these guys give away a ton of information here. There's a lot packed in here. That's called the abundance cycle. We want you to come, we give it away. We want you to come learn, apply, grow, but you're going to reach a point of success. There will come a point of success. We're just planting seeds within you. We believe in you so much that we know a few years in the future, you're going to say, I remember those guys that loved on me, gave me the free information. I need a financial advisor. You're going to remember who planted those seeds. That's why it is the abundance cycle. Complete the drill. We work with people all across the country. Continue to subscribe. I mean, this is the start of 2021. We're excited to see what happens. I'm sure hoping this age is a heck of a lot better than what happened in 2020. I'm your host, Brian Preston. Mr. Bo Hanson, Money Guy Team, out.